Let's talk about the LA Clippers. They made moves to make themselves look incredibly strong, but I know, you've heard everyone play this song before. Well, let's play a different song. Michael Bolton, When a Man Loves a Woman.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and I actually run Kevin Durant's Twitter account. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and we're available on all platforms, so hit the thumb and the double bang and leave your comments. It would be great if you could do that. All right, we are here, of course, and we are talking about the LA Clippers. We had a couple of days ago a first mock draft of the season. More of those will be coming. Yes. Points leagues, yes. ESPN point scoring, yes. Deeper leagues, yes. Auctions, yes. Shallow leagues, yes. It's all happening. It's all happening. It's August the 15th, 16th. Those 17th, I don't know what the date is, but they will all happen. I just want to get the first one done, out of the way, get an early idea of certain things. There are certain players in that mock draft that I think went incredibly late, some that were undrafted, that I found interesting, and we'll see where that all develops. What we're doing now, oh yeah, by the way, Basketball Monster is open. Join up. Projections are there. All your tools are available. Once Yahoo opens, you'll be able to sync your leagues in. Everything is there. Read the article that I wrote about interpreting projections and what it means and how it makes sense. I hope it makes sense anyway. Okay. So, we're talking Clippers. We might as well talk Clippers. So, for us to talk about the LA Clippers, I'm joined by the host of the Locked On Clippers podcast. You may know him as the best mate and confidant of Kevin Durant. He is, of course, Darian Vaziri, Dime Dropper. Welcome back to the show.
Josh, it's always a pleasure to do these every year. I look forward to them, and it's always a good time.
I hope it's a good time. And this Clippers team, I mentioned this in the intro, is I feel like we do this so often. Go, oh, the Clippers, they've gotten so strong, and they're a real challenge. And like, you know the Clippers law, you know what happens. But again, we sit here and go, Jesus, I don't know how I can not say that this team made moves to make them stronger. Of course, there's always going to be something the Clippers is at some point, I guess. At some point, the curse will break, I'm guessing. But they made big moves. They reinforced their depth. They got players in who fit the needs that they have. And one of the things that they did, because last season when we were coming on and talking about this, we were looking at the season and going, yeah, okay, I'm not sure what they're going to do at center because Ty Lue has had a reluctance to play Ivica Zubac's big minutes. Their backup here is Mo Bamba, who is not a quality NBA player. He's not an NBA quality player either. But now they've said, nah, screw that. We're bringing in Brook Lopez to be the backup. Now, in the past, some of the concerns people have had with Zubac, he's so good. Why is he playing 27 minutes a night? What is going on? They unleashed him last season. As the season went on, he started to play more and more and more and more because there was nobody else. But now there is somebody else. There's somebody who's a very good center, who has been a starting center and probably could start for 15 to 20 teams in the NBA. So, do you think, Darian, that Ty Lue is going to say, all right, if it's you pull back to that 27, Brook plays 21, and we're good there? Or is it going to be Zubac running 33, Lopez in and out, resting, preserving his body? How do you think that's going to go?
So that definitely concerns me a little bit that, I'm very happy to have Brook Lopez. I was a big Brook Lopez fan back in Brooklyn. Obviously, we're very removed from that, but I still think having a guy that's been a starting center his entire career and just 2 years ago in the 2022-23 season, or 3 years ago after this season, he was a defensive player of the year candidate.
Yeah.
Coming off our bench is going to be awesome. We essentially have two starting caliber centers. So now when Zubac goes to the bench, we're not falling off a cliff. And if Zubac does go down with an injury some games, we are not totally screwed. Now, the only downside is, does having a backup center take away minutes from Ivica Zubac and kind of slow down his yearly development that we've seen, his improvement every year? If I had to make a prediction, he was at, as you said, 33 minutes last season. I'll say he'll be at 31 minutes this season per game.
That's interesting. I should probably bring up what my actual projections are for him for his minutes this season, but I think I had him around that similar mark because like Zubac was amazing last season. He should have been in contention for the All-Star game, in my opinion, for All-NBA. He was right up there in Defensive Player of the Year. He did the things that I saw flashes of before he came to the NBA. He did the things that I saw flashes of him when he played for the Lakers. He did the things that I saw from him when he was playing 26 minutes a night and getting benched so they'd play Nick Batum small ball center lines, which of course worked a lot. But it always felt that Lou was very reticent to give him those bigger minutes, and because we'd seen that play out, and then he had no choice last season. So Zubac is 28 years of age now. He had that career year. It is going to be intriguing. Do you think there is any way, I think probably not, but do you think there's any way that they play those two together very much like the Şengün-Steven Adams combination, I guess?
There's been talks about it from Clipper media, and they asked Brook Lopez that when he was doing media availability at Summer League, and he talked about how I could space the floor for him, give him room to work with down low. I think we'll see it at some point in the season, but based on Ty Lue's coaching strategies and his prioritization of spacing and being a coach that's known for small ball, I don't believe you're going to see that much, but it's definitely something to play around with. The con there is two guys that play mostly drop coverage. Are they going to be quick enough to move around and cover space? Especially with most teams these days playing a floor spacing 4. Are you going to have Brook Lopez, closing out hard on the perimeter, that kind of thing, or Zubac? So you're likely not going to see much of it, especially because of who Ty Lue is as a coach. I think, as you mentioned, with Steven Adams and Alperen Şengün, I think Ime Udoka has a very different basketball lens than Ty Lue. That's more catered towards defense size, kind of more old school. So I don't think you're going to see too much of it, but I believe you'll see it at some point.
We saw the other difference is that Steven Adams and Şengün are monsters in terms of attacking the offensive glass, and then Brook Lopez, that's not his strength. Zubac is a very good rebounder, obviously, and Lopez is a different sort of guy, more of a box out sort of a player. But you're right, on the offensive end, no problem. I think that would work okay. But defensively, that would be considering Brook Lopez might be the slowest player in the entire NBA. I don't know exactly how that would work out. But the thing is, again, you always got to look at this stuff, and we can sit there and go, well, maybe they can play together. But again, when Lou has shown over and over and over again a preference for this small ball, and John Collins has played probably half of his minutes at center over the last few years, and Nick Batum is still there on this team, and Derek Jones Jr. has shown an ability to play that small ball center position at times. Like, he's got some of those options there. Nick Batum is back again. He's got some of those other options to be able to throw out there that it seems like moving away from his preference into something that has, if he fits, is going to be tough to see. Back to our original point about Zubac and his minutes, I have him also projected at 31 minutes a game this season. But I would say, Darian, correct me if I'm wrong on this or if you have a different opinion, I would say it's more likely that he plays 29 than he plays 34.
Yeah, I would say it's more likely he plays 29 than 34. But if we're talking about Ivica Zubac playing less than 30 minutes, me and I believe the rest of the fan base would be kind of outraged at that. Because
I can say that.
This is the brightest part of the Clippers organization right now to me is Ivica Zubac. He's a guy that isn't just for the now, but he's also for the future, even the post Kawhi Leonard, James Harden era. So I believe that he needs to continue to develop. And what I mean by that is continue to be used more offensively. And this was obviously the best season of his career. He continues to get better. I think he'll still get better, but I believe because of what we're talking about, the minutes and the guys we're going to talk about later in the show, there will be a slight statistical drop-off in terms of points, unfortunately. But I could be wrong because it took us till later in the season to start using him more as, throwing it down to him in the post more frequently. And now he got to the point where he was getting double teamed and he's starting to get better passing out of double teams. And late in the season, he got his first triple double of his career. So now we know Ivica Zubac is capable of being thrown the ball consistently as one of the focal points of our offense. And I hope that we start the season with that kind of emphasis. However, with the new guys we have, it will be, I don't know. I question it, especially with the lack of non-all-stars getting post touches in today's NBA.
Yeah, like that's the thing. He sort of bucked the trend. We thought, okay, Kawhi is coming back, and we'll see how that works. But like his touches went up, his output went up, his minutes went up, like everything went up as Kawhi returned. Okay, that's interesting. That's a bit of a wrinkle that we didn't really see coming, and that's something we're going to have to see how it comes into next season. We're going to talk about those some of those new additions coming up. Bradley Beal being the next one. We'll talk about that in a sec. Before we do that, today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth. It might be 401ks or properties or investments. And when you don't have that full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That is why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. I'm sure Steve Ballmer uses Monarch to track all his millions and billions of dollars. Yeah, you never know where the odd billion might just go to. If you want to keep track of your billions that are just laying around, Monarch Money is going to be the app for you. You and your partner can track your spending together, put your budgets and goals all in that one place. So don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That is 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONNBA. We're here, of course, talking to Darian Vaziri of Locked On Clippers about the LA Clippers and their upcoming season. This was rumored for a while. I'm glad that it's been sorted at this point because I hate waiting on these. Like, oh, maybe the Warriors are signing Al Horford and Jonathan Kuminga's going here, and then sure, Josh Giddey's going back to Chicago. Just get shit done. Like, it's annoying. The Bradley Beal thing, we sort of saw that writing on the wall, especially after the Norman Powell trade. And it has happened, and Bradley Beal has signed, and I expect, barring something weird, I expect that he will be starting in place of Norman Powell. Do you see that as a straight swap? I know that some people will be like, no, Chris Paul will definitely start, and James Harden will move across. I don't think that's happening. I think it's just a pretty clear Beal for Powell straight swap. How do you view that?
From everything that's been said from our media members, coming from what the organization is thinking, it seems as though Bradley Beal has come to LA with the guarantee that he's going to start to begin the season. So, which makes me a little bit nervous because, it kind of reminds me of the whole Russell Westbrook thing where they promised him a starting role. He got that starting role. He ended up having some really good moments. Then we brought in James Harden, and then he got really upset. And then going back to last season when Bradley Beal got moved to the bench, you saw a drop off in his not just production but his interest in his effort level on the floor and what he was saying after games. It looked like he had kind of just thrown in the towel because he knew that the Phoenix Suns, wanted to move him to get off of his contract and stuff like that. So I'm just looking to see how Bradley Beal competes on a nightly basis. I believe he's going to be rejuvenated, coming to a new place. It is his best chance probably to contend for his championship in his entire career, I would think. Of course, he had some really solid teams in Washington with John Wall way back when, but if the Clippers are healthy, I'm not saying we could be a championship contender, but I believe we can win a round or two. And I believe, the Wizards only got past the first round, in 2017 and 2014 and 15. So it is going to be interesting to see how he blends in. I think offensively he'll fit in pretty well. I'm just curious to see if he's willing to sacrifice, because what if there are times where we aren't looking good enough defensively because we have moved Chris Dunn and Derek Jones Jr. to the bench. And that was one of the biggest, bright spots of the Clippers last season is we were third in the league in defensive rating because of the point of attack defenders and on-ball defense of Derek Jones and Chris Dunn. I'm a little bit afraid that taking both of those guys out of the starting lineup, you're now getting Bradley Beal to guard the best players on the opposing teams to start games. And that makes me a little bit nervous because at best, I think Bradley Beal is a slightly above average defender at this stage of his career, and slightly above average is not going to do it for a team with the aspirations the Clippers have in terms of your best point of attack defender. Now, of course, he's not the best one on the roster, but that's why it's going to be a challenge for Tyler to distribute all these minutes. And, I believe Bradley Beal will close every game, but I'm just curious to see, based on what the team needs, how is Bradley Beal going to buy in? Is he going to average more points than James Harden? Is he going to be our second leading scorer? What is going to be the case with Brad at this stage of his career? But ultimately, I do think he's a pretty good fit, and he replaces Norman Powell and can do things that Norman Powell can't in regards to like on-ball shot creation for others and himself.
You're right. Like Powell had a really strong start to last season, but he is very one note. He's like, I'm shooting threes at a high volume and I'm scoring a lot. And then when other players came back and Kawhi returned and Powell sort of disappeared, and then he had those multiple hamstring injuries and he struggles in certain other areas. Now I think Beal's one of those guys also that is the victim of what he was being paid because he got the money. The team agreed to the contract. Phoenix traded for him, understanding all those things, yet he was vilified that he was the worst player in the NBA. I thought he was all right. I think his shooting's been really good. His efficiency's been solid. There was a lot of personal stuff where he was getting dicked over by the team a lot. Like, it's not a great environment to be going there and go, hey, man, like, you're worth too much money. We hate you and we want you gone. Can you please go? And he's like, no. He's like, please go. No. Like, hey, that's not a good environment to sort of exist in. And also, again, when he was benched, I didn't think that sort of a move was made in the, like, hey, you're not good enough to start. It was like, we want to piss you off so you leave. None of that's a good situation, right? So I think the Beal's last couple of seasons have been actually pretty good for what he was asked to do. You talk about sacrifice. Like, he sacrificed a lot on those teams. His usage would go way down from like 27 down to like 22 or so. He'd be a 24-point scorer down to a 17-point scorer. There was big drops. He accepted that role and did the things that he needed to do. So he is an interesting player that now that I think that he's free of that contract albatross that was coloring some of the perception about him, it's going to be intriguing to see how he plays or how he is viewed as a player. I can see sort of always like, man, what a redemption from Bradley Beal, and he puts up the same numbers he's put up the last 2 years just because there's that narrative perception switch. The defensive part of it, though, is really interesting because you're right. Like, he's not a terrible defender. But he's not a good defender. But when you're put into that situation where you are the best guy that's not Kawhi, it makes it a little bit harder because then you get picked on more and it can tend to look worse. So that is going to be the challenge there. I can see we saw Ty Lue mix it and match quite a bit last season as well, but obviously you're dealing with internal politics there with Beal and all that sort of stuff too. So it is going to be intriguing. Darian, plus of course I'm sure he'll miss some time with a million sprained ankles that he seemed to have last season. But okay, just as an overall, do you think it's an upgrade for the way the team currently is to have Beal over Powell? Not including the fact that, when you traded away Norman Powell, you're able to get Beal and Chris Paul, which I think is very clearly an upgrade to get those two guys. Do you think that just Beal for Powell is an upgrade?
Yeah, especially in the playoffs. Norman Powell had an amazing season last year, all-star caliber, because, the first half of the season, he was really a candidate to be on the all-star team. A lot of Clipper fans were upset that he didn't make it. There's only so many spots, on the All-Star team, so many good players in the NBA always.
They should have been upset that Zubac didn't make it, not Powell, to be honest.
Yeah. I think, also Zubac had a stronger second half of the season than in his first half. But Bradley Beal, I think in the playoffs, just given his experience and what he can do in terms of creating his own shot, being able to come off screens and knock down shots, but also just in isolation, his step back jumper going both ways and his pull up is very good. Norman Powell doesn't really have that. He's more, as you said, catch and shoot, but also just coming off that left to right curl. He does a great job of turning the corner and getting downhill. I will say Norman Powell does a better job of getting to the free throw line than Bradley Beal. I'll acknowledge that. But I believe that the experience and the shot making, the overall skill of Bradley Beal, we're talking about a guy who, yes, has declined, but we're talking about a guy who used to average 30 points that's declined. So there's a very good basketball player still there who a lot of people, as you said, have kind of acted like he's not good anymore because the expectation was high given the amount of money he was taking up on the Suns' payroll. So I do believe that in the playoffs he's going to be an upgrade because Norman Powell, let's be honest, did not have a very good series against Denver. And if I have to talk about the players that I believe performed under their regular season production, for sure it was Norman Powell more than anyone on our team, although you can argue Bogdanovich as well. Now, would I say I was more disappointed in those guys than James Harden or Kawhi Leonard? Probably not, because I have higher expectations for our stars, especially in Kawhi's case. I know his efficiency was very good, but, I knew we needed more than 25 points per game. And just he really only had 3 good games out of 7, in my opinion. And we were going to need a great Kawhi Leonard to beat Denver. I talked about this on Locked On Clippers the other day, but in every series that he played in the 2019 title run for Toronto, he averaged more points than what he did with us in the Nuggets series. So a lot of like the Kawhi fans, the stands will say, oh, he was good enough. He didn't get enough help. And I think he was the best player in the series for the Clippers. But good is just not going to be good enough against a team of Denver's caliber. You're going to need great from Kawhi. However, if we had gotten more from Norman Powell and Bogdanovic, maybe we wouldn't be having that discussion. But in the context of championship, you're going to need a great Kawhi. You're going to need a great, if you have a clear-cut number one option, you're going to need them to be great if you want them to win a championship. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, it is an upgrade overall.
It is going to be, look, I think teams and the good teams are going to be really having to push to have that extra depth of players. Like Bogdanovic is someone who's like even feels like an afterthought, but like we're going to have Chris Paul and Bogdanovic coming off the bench on this team along with Chris Dunn. Like it is really strong. This team is really deep. We're going to talk about the other new addition who I expect to be in this starting lineup come opening night. Again, one of these players that was a part, we talk again, this Norman Powell deal, which was I say seismic, but in terms of the Clippers, like it's remade the entire look of the team. Norman Powell goes out, John Collins comes in, it opens up space, and Bradley Beal comes in, and Chris Paul comes in. Like that is getting these sort of three players in this scenario in exchange for Norman Powell in the final year of his deal. So I expect that John Collins starts, and this is a team that has, again, we've talked about going small a lot, but Kawhi, after Paul George left last season, he was really the only guy that was playing the four alongside Derek Jones. So now we get a situation where John Collins is a 4/5, which I don't know when the last time the Clippers had a player that was sort of that guy that could move in between that. An incredibly strong rebounder, aggressive offensive rebounder as well. What does that do for the Clippers play style where Collins' strengths are not something they've always had to deal with on their team, or they haven't had that to rely upon, and it moves Kawhi back down the positional spectrum? How does that improve it? And like how, it's hard to look. Collins had that one weird shooting season. He shot really well last season. He played well. He was too good for the Jazz at times, even though he came off the bench for portions of the season until they had multiple injuries. Like how does a player like Collins impact what others do, and how important is he to the, I guess, success of these lineups?
Yeah, John Collins is somebody who it feels like Clipper fans have been talking about getting for a while, and this was one of the moves that it felt like Clippers social media kind of spoke this into existence, and it actually happened. You talked about it. We haven't had a guy like this in terms of that big forward with that kind of athleticism in probably the entire Kawhi Leonard era as a Clipper.
Yeah, I can't think of anybody.
Marcus Morris was good, but he's a totally different player. John Collins, I think this is a direct response to Aaron Gordon giving us so many problems in that series that we had. Having an athletic guy that can, as you said, crash the offensive glass, but just in general, not make Kawhi Leonard guard these athletic guys at the rim as much and maybe hang out on the perimeter more and be in the gaps up top to maybe get some steals and be in the passing lanes, as opposed to being that low man help when Ivica Zubac gets dragged out just a bit. That's going to be where John Collins comes in huge. Also a lob threat for James Harden as well, and a guy that, as you said, shot the ball really well last season. With all the stuff that he can bring us in terms of, secondary rim protection. We're talking about a guy who averaged 19 and 8 on 53, 40, 85 splits, which is pretty crazy. That's pretty insane at his position. So this also gives John Collins, just like I said about Bradley Beal, his most prominent role on a winning team. Obviously he was a big part of that 2021 Hawks team that made the conference finals, but he's never been on a team this good. I think, again, the Clippers have so many options. It's going to be definitely a challenge for the coaching staff to manage these guys. Some guys are going to have to sacrifice, and John Collins may be one of them in certain moments, but I believe he's going to start, and he's going to let Kawhi Leonard slide down to the 3, which just gives us so much more size. And that's going to be very beneficial in my opinion. But I think the main thing I see is, Ivica Zubac gets pulled out of the paint, a team tries to throw a lob, and here comes John Collins flying from the baseline to get a deflection on those lobs. I think that's the first thing I picture. Then, of course, the ability to knock down open threes. I just hope that starting John Collins and starting Bradley Beal, we don't get torched to start games defensively because you're taking a Chris Dunn and a Derek Jones Jr. out of that starting lineup. And I just think one of the most important parts of NBA team building now is that screen navigator at point of attack that guards the best guard on the opposing team, because teams are running a million pick and rolls. It's more spacing than ever before. You need to have guys that can get over those screens and not have your big on an island. But even if Ivica Zubac is on an island, having John Collins come from the weak side as a secondary rim protector will be really nice. So I'm really looking forward to John.
I hope that Lou gets creative with some of this stuff, and while like they might start, Bradley Beal and they start Collins, like, making early subs and, like, bringing Dunn in, 4 minutes in or whatever, and letting Beal and Paul run the second unit, after the 10-minute mark, and then through to the start of the second quarter, and Collins comes out, and then you got Derek, like, just giving everyone the starters minutes, or the introduction to become a starter and all that sort of stuff, but just making sure that he gets creative versus like, no, we play them the starters for the first 7.5 minutes, and then we make one change, and like, you get into a 10, like the Tom Thibodeau, you start Alfred Payton for 8 minutes, you get into a 10-point hole, then everyone else has got to catch back up. Like, I hope there's a level of, and I believe Lou has a level of creativity. He's also someone who in the past has made decisions with his lineups which have been weird at first, and then he makes the quick adjustment and gets it right, which is one of the things you want to see. You'd love people to get things right immediately, but making the adjustments is cool, and that's a huge positive. So I do want to see him get creative with some of this stuff, because like, there are so many options on this team. We've got that projected 5-man group of Harden, Kawhi, Zubac, Beal, and Collins, but then there's Paul, there's Lopez, there's Bogdanovic, there's Jones, there's Dunn, there's Batum. Like, that's 11 deep already. Yeah, it falls off a little bit after that, because then you're relying upon a pair of Kobe's and Jordan Miller and Yannick Coden Niederhauser, which I don't think will ever be ready to play in the NBA. But it gets a little iffy after that. But that 11-man group is strong, and it's going to require a lot of manipulation, I guess, from Lou to get that going. What do you think that you're having Beal in this group, a full season of Kawhi? Let me rephrase that. We hope a full season of Kawhi, because, Darren, unless I'm mistaken, and this is the biggest mystery in the entire NBA, we haven't heard anything that Kawhi's hurt, but that can come out at any point that something random has happened. But we are not expecting him to begin the year in January. Having all these guys, we saw James Harden carry this team early. We're going to have to see guys in their production, their roles, like, adjust this season. Like, who out of the two main stars in Harden and Kawhi, who do you think has to take the biggest sort of adjustment with these additions, your Collins, Beal, and Paul?
Harden, because as you said, he was in a role last season that he's comfortable with, which is carrying the team, carrying the offense, not really having to defer to anyone. Now he's going to have to adjust. And Ty Lue said this at the draft party that the Clippers held at Intuit Dome just a couple of months ago during the NBA draft. He said, when you have your best player missing over half the season, you have to play a different way. So that was essentially saying that we had two different teams, basically. Yeah. One in which James Harden and Norman Powell were running the show with Zubac, and another where Kawhi Leonard was getting integrated into being our best player. But in the playoffs, per NBA.com's tracking data, it said that James Harden had the ball in his hands for a total of 4 minutes more on average than Kawhi Leonard in that Nuggets series, which to me is way too much in terms of, like, the difference there, the proportion. It needs to be a Kawhi Leonard-centric offense. Not that James Harden won't have the ball the most. He will. But more of an emphasis on Kawhi isolations and throwing the ball to Kawhi and letting him work just to get him ready for, what's to come in the playoffs, which is that he's the focal point. Now, it's not just that adjustment. As you mentioned, Beal is here. He can handle the ball and pick and roll as well. We now have a pick and roll maestro besides Harden in CP3. So less minutes for James, less usage, and hopefully he buys into that. Obviously lower stats, buys into that, so then he has more legs during the playoffs, because it's a tale as old as time with James Harden. He's overworked in the playoffs. He runs out of gas, partially because of the load that he carries on teams, but also the way that he plays basketball, which is heavy on ball, and that can be taxing, especially with how much he dribbles the basketball.
I know you'll be aware of this last point, though, on Kawhi, that he shot like over 41% from three consecutive seasons, and in the final 22 games of last season, in the last 2 months of the year, he shot 44% from three. Like, he just doesn't miss from there anymore, like, which is, again, considering where he came in. Like, I don't think people realize that, like, hitting 41% from three is hard to do, and he just does it automatically every year, and his, like, usage was huge. He played like 36 minutes a night down the stretch as well. He was playing, like, and again, I don't know if the Clippers, maybe that more about this, but I don't know if the Clippers said, like, your knee is a ticking time bomb. I think we're all aware of that, so we're just going to go incredibly hard here, because we know that, like, once you're gone, we have to change everything anyway. So are they just saying, like, just push it balls to the wall now and let's see what happens this year? That's a little bit what it feels, because, like, the amount of load they gave him after he returned and he pushed it back up and he responded well, it feels like it's a matter of time, but it did feel like it's a change from what they'd done in the past.
Well, he had a procedure that prevented him from playing USA for USA in the Olympics. So, I genuinely believe he just couldn't play. And then he came back, and it took him a little while. This season was the closest, believe it or not, that I was to saying, okay, he's just not going to return to that all-star level.
Same.
I almost said it. And then lo and behold, he just finds a way to get back to these crazy shooting splits that you're talking about. It is pretty remarkable. Can he replicate the production that we saw in 2021 in the playoffs? That, probably when we're talking about that Dallas series, maybe the greatest series that any Clipper has ever had. Because I do believe that basketball-wise, Kawhi Leonard is the best player in Clipper history, but obviously in terms of what he's accomplished, no.
That's a big call. The best, because I'm trying to recall. I think was it a Blake Griffin Rockets or Blake Griffin versus Spurs series? But remember that one?
I'm always going to go with a series that we win when but I would say either Blake Griffin against the Spurs or Chris Paul against the Spurs because that hamstring, that game win. There are only a couple guys, Josh, that have made a game winner in Game 7 in the NBA history, and the ones that I know off the top of my head: Sam Jones in 1962, Mario Elis' kiss of death in 1995, Kawhi Leonard in 2019 against the Sixers, and Chris Paul against the Spurs. A game winner in Game 7 doesn't actually happen that much. So, the fact that we got to even experience one and I was in the building for it, that is one of the moments that makes Chris Paul arguably the greatest Clipper of all time. And having him back for this season, besides all the basketball stuff we're talking about, it just gives a feel-good story to this. CP3 is back home. Like, it feels so great to have a proper Clipper legend back, especially as I'm covering the team because, people criticize me for not being the highest on Kawhi's tenure with the team and James Harden, the doubts I have about him winning a title, and Paul George and how much he used to kind of stick his foot in his mouth and leave a lot on the table. As Clipper fans, we criticized him because it felt like he just was so inconsistent for a star. Being able to cover a player that I genuinely looked up to as a kid and changed our franchise forever is going to be an awesome feeling. So I'm really excited about that.
It is an exciting season coming up, Darren, and of course you'll have it covered for us all over on the Locked On Clippers podcast. Thanks again for coming on, and you're trying to clear up some of these questions we have about this Clippers team.
Thank you so much, Josh. Anytime.
And that is the end of the show. The Clippers are incredibly fascinating, and given some of the fantasy ramifications of players missing, you're going to see players pushed higher in drafts like James Harden, but we are expecting downturns. And I think that people are going to be very cautious on Kawhi, rightfully so. Cautious on Beal, rightfully so. Maybe extra aggressive on Zubac. We'll see how that goes. It is interesting. I love that mock draft I did a couple of days ago. I'm loving going through these teams and talking about all of the interesting scenarios and questions that do surround them. Guys, hit the subscribe button, thumb up, comment. You know how it goes. We are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.